The luxury car showroom was buzzing with soft jazz music and the delicate clink of champagne flutes. Models in sleek gowns posed beside million-dollar vehicles, and photographers moved swiftly, capturing candid elegance for the upcoming charity calendar. Claire Whitmore barely paid attention to the engine specs or the champagne in her hand. Events like this were routine for her. Her posture was composed, her dress flawlessly tailored. But the moment her gaze swept across the crowd and landed on a particular photo shoot set up near the corner, her world stopped. Three young boys, about 5 years old, sat together on the hood of a silver Bentley, smiling nervously at the camera. Claire's grip on her flute loosened. The glass slipped, crashed to the floor, and shattered. People turned toward the noise, their reactions varying from annoyance to concern. Claire didn't notice. Her breath was caught halfway in her throat, her heart pounding like it was trying to punch through her chest. Her eyes stayed locked on the boys. Identical curly dark hair, deep hazel eyes, those cheeks. God, those cheeks. Her skin turned cold. She took one step forward, then another. The crowd blurred. All she could hear was the muffled beating of her heart and a high-pitched ring in her ears. Then, without warning, the words came out louder than she intended, louder than she thought possible. "Those are my babies." Conversations halted, heads turned. A few photographers lowered their cameras. One of the event organizers began to approach her, concerned. Claire didn't care. She moved faster now, almost running, her heels clicking against the marble floor like gunshots. The boys flinched at her sudden movement. A young woman, clearly their caretaker, stepped in defensively. "Ma'am, please, what are you doing?" she said sharply. Claire didn't answer her. Her eyes were scanning every detail. The boys' ears, the slight dimples when one of them blinked nervously, the way they were seated together protectively. It wasn't just a resemblance. She knew. The crowd started to murmur. Some recognized her, Claire Whitmore, the art gallery heiress, the high-profile philanthropist. But no one had ever seen her like this. Her composure cracked, tears welling up in her eyes, voice shaking as she tried to make sense of it out loud. "They told me they died," she whispered almost to herself. "They said there was nothing they could do." She turned toward the caretaker, who looked confused, unsure whether to call security or try to calm her down. "Where did they come from? Who are you? Who are they?" Claire demanded, her tone on the edge between desperation and fury. The caretaker stiffened. "I work with Horizons Foster Outreach. These boys are part of our Scholarship Spotlight campaign. That's all I know, ma'am," she said carefully. "Please, you're scaring them." Claire looked again at the boys. The one in the red shirt clutched the other's arm. The middle one leaned forward slightly like he was curious. The one on the left simply stared at her, unblinking. Her heart ached, her hands trembled. Something in her gut twisted in a way she hadn't felt since the night they wheeled her out of the delivery room and told her that her children didn't survive. Security finally arrived. A tall man in a black suit stepped in between Claire and the boys. "Miss Whitmore, are you all right? Please, let's step outside." His voice was firm but polite. Claire backed up slightly, still trying to keep her eyes on the children. "I'm not crazy," she muttered. "I'm not imagining this." She felt someone gently guide her by the elbow, and she didn't resist. She let herself be moved toward the glass doors, still looking over her shoulder, still replaying the impossible truth her eyes had shown her. Outside, the warm spring air hit her like a slap. She clutched her clutch bag tightly and leaned against the stone column of the showroom entrance. Julia, her longtime assistant, came rushing out moments later. "Claire? Claire, what the hell happened?" Claire turned to her, eyes wide and brimming. "Julia, they were there. They're alive. I saw them." Julia blinked. "Who?" Claire swallowed. "The triplets. My sons. They're alive." Julia stared at her in disbelief. "Claire, it's been 6 years. You said the hospital." "They lied," Claire cut her off, almost growling. They lied to me, Julia. Those boys inside, they look exactly like James. Exactly. Julia glanced back through the glass doors, saw the boys being ushered away by the event coordinator, and looked back at Claire with a mix of concern and confusion. "You're sure?" Claire didn't hesitate. "As sure as I've ever been about anything." Silence fell between them. Claire looked down at her shaking hands. "I have to find out where they came from," she said. "Who signed their paperwork, where they were born." Julia's face paled. "Claire, if this is real, if what you saw is real, then that means someone did something awful, on purpose." Claire nodded. Her voice was low but resolute. "Then we're going to find out who and why." The moment passed, but the echo of Claire's scream, "Those are my babies," still hung in the air of the luxury showroom. The broken champagne glass was swept away. The boys were taken home. But something had been set in motion that couldn't be undone. Claire had seen them, and she wasn't going to stop until she got answers. Claire Whitmore had never been the kind of woman who let her emotions show. Not at charity galas, not at boardroom dinners, not even during her own wedding. Her life was curated, polished, scheduled to the second. Growing up as the only child of Charles Whitmore III, Atlanta's real estate mogul, she was taught that emotions were like clutter, meant to be hidden behind beautiful furniture and expensive art. But beneath the designer silk and poised smiles, Claire had always carried a silence inside her. It was the silence that began 6 years ago in a hospital room filled with flowers and empty bassinets. That day was supposed to be one of the happiest in her life. She had been through a high-risk pregnancy, triplets, conceived through IVF, a miracle after 3 years of failed attempts. Her husband, Gregory, had been oddly distant during the entire process, always citing business or travel. But Claire didn't care. She was going to be a mother. She remembered lying in that hospital bed, drugged and exhausted, waiting for the nurses to bring her babies. Instead, she got a cold-faced doctor and a single sentence. "We're sorry. There were complications." No further explanation. No funeral. No footprints, just silence. For years, Claire tried to believe it, tried to move on. Gregory insisted they let it go, even warned her not to dwell on things we can't change. Her friends offered condolences, sent orchids, and then pretended it had never happened. But Claire never stopped, feeling the ache, like something had been torn from her before she could even touch it. Her therapist called it complicated grief. Claire called it theft. Every year on the boys' would-be birthday, she found herself staring at the same photo of the sonogram, wondering what they would have looked like, how their voices would have sounded. Only Julia had seen the truth up close. Julia Matthews wasn't just a personal assistant. She had been Claire's shadow for over a decade, hired initially as a social media manager and quickly evolving into a trusted confidant. Julia had held her hand the day she came back from the hospital. She had stayed overnight when Gregory went back to work the next morning like nothing had happened. Julia had seen the unopened nursery, the untouched baby clothes, the unopened letters Claire had written to each child in a moment of heartbreak. She had seen Claire cry without making a sound. After the incident at the car event, Julia sat Claire down in her townhouse and poured her a glass of wine. The bottle remained on the table, nearly full. Claire stared into the glass for long minutes before finally whispering, "I wasn't supposed to see them." Julia sat across from her in silence. Claire continued, her voice tighter now. "What are the odds, Julia? What are the odds that I'd go to that event, that they'd be there, that they'd look exactly like James did when he was 3? James was Claire's brother, who had passed away young, her mental comparison. Point for the boys' features. Julia hesitated. "Claire, it's possible. But if this is real, it means the hospital lied, that someone lied. And that means—" Claire interrupted, "that means I'm not crazy. That means I've been grieving ghosts when my children were alive. The room felt heavier now, heavier. Claire put down the glass without drinking. I don't care what it takes. I want to know who those boys are. I want to know where they came from. And I want to know why I was told they were gone. Her hands were clenched now, nails digging into her palm. She walked to the mantel, where 3 small, framed sonogram images still sat. She never took them down. Gregory hated them, once told her it was morbid to keep them there, but Claire refused. She stared at the grainy images now, her reflection faint in the glass. I used to think I was being dramatic, she said softly, that maybe I'd imagined the way the nurses looked that day, but I didn't. Julia, they were hiding something. Julia joined her at the fireplace. Then let's start digging, right now. Claire turned slowly, a fire in her eyes that Julia hadn't seen in years. They started that night. Old files, hospital emails, discharge records. Everything Claire had kept locked in her bedroom safe was pulled out. Some documents were missing, others were incomplete. Julia opened her laptop and began cross-referencing the charity event sponsor list. Horizons Foster Outreach, she muttered. They're real, non-profit, but look at this. They've only been active for 6 years, started the same month your babies were born. Claire leaned over her shoulder. Her mind raced. Coincidence or connection? She didn't believe in coincidence anymore. We need someone on the inside, Claire said. Someone who was there back then. But that would take time. In the days that followed, Claire's life began to split in 2. The one the public saw, still attending art events, still smiling for interviews, and the one behind closed doors, tearing through medical records and trying to recall every face from that hospital wing. She even reached out to one of her old OB-GYNs, only to find that he had moved overseas just months after the delivery. Another coincidence, another loose thread. Gregory, meanwhile, had no idea any of this was happening. He hadn't even asked why she came home early from the car event. Typical, and then came the nightmares. Claire would wake up gasping, her heart racing. The image of the boys' faces burned into her memory. Only in the dreams. They weren't just sitting on a Bentley. They were reaching out for her, mouths moving without sound, begging to be taken home. She'd sit up, drenched in sweat, and whisper to herself, "They're alive! I know they are!" The pain was no longer passive. It was active now. It was driving her. She hadn't felt this kind of purpose in years. She would no longer accept silence. Claire stood on her balcony one evening, watching the Atlanta skyline shimmer. She remembered her father's voice once telling her, "In our world, secrets keep people safe." But this wasn't safety. This was a prison, and she was done pretending. She looked up at the sky and said the words aloud like a vow to the universe. "You're not gone. I'm coming for you." Behind her, Julia stepped onto the balcony holding a folder. "Claire," she said carefully, "I think I found something." Before everything unraveled, before the screams at the showroom and the folder full of secrets, Claire Whitmore's life was, on the surface, perfect. Every morning began the same. Soft, classical music from the bedroom speakers, a personal chef preparing her low-carb breakfast, and a freshly steamed silk dress waiting in her closet. Her townhouse in Buckhead was a monument to taste and restraint, minimalist furniture, pastel art, and lighting so precisely tuned it could double as a gallery. There were no toys in corners, no signs of family chaos, just curated tranquility. Her routine was a shield, a performance choreographed to perfection. Her marriage, too, looked flawless to outsiders. Gregory Whitmore was the picture of Southern aristocracy, well-dressed, articulate, and powerful. He ran a regional investment firm and spent more time on private jets than at home. Claire played the dutiful wife, appearing at fundraisers, luncheons, and political events with poise. They were seen as Atlanta's golden couple, him, the kingmaker, her, the philanthropist with magazine cover grace. But behind closed doors, the air between them was colder than marble. They spoke only when necessary. And affection was something reserved for public display. Claire used to wonder when exactly the love had disappeared. Maybe it was never really there to begin with. The pregnancy had been her idea. After years of media pressure and subtle comments from Gregory's mother about extending the legacy, Claire finally agreed to IVF. It took 3 rounds. She remembered the silence in the clinic waiting rooms, the sterile smell of the procedure rooms, the ache of wanting something real in a life full of performance. When the doctor told her she was carrying triplets, she cried alone in the parking lot. It wasn't fear, it was joy. For once, she had created something that couldn't be faked, something alive. Gregory's reaction had been underwhelming. He stared at the ultrasound like it was a stock report. 3, he muttered, barely blinking. That's unexpected. Claire forced a laugh, trying to fill the awkward silence. Triplets, Greg. It's a miracle. He nodded absently, scrolling his phone. Let's make sure the press doesn't find out. Not until it's safe. That was Gregory's answer to everything. Control the narrative. Claire tried to believe he was just nervous. That, underneath his detachment, was excitement. But the further the pregnancy progressed, the more distant he became. He skipped appointments. He missed the nursery reveal. He never touched her stomach. Still, Claire threw herself into the preparation. She hired designers to create a gender-neutral nursery with soft greens and creams. She chose lullabies, read parenting books, and even knitted tiny socks late at night when she couldn't sleep. Julia often found her asleep in the rocking chair, a baby name book open in her lap. They chose 3 names: Eli, Noah, and Micah. Claire whispered them to herself like prayers. It was during these quiet moments that she felt most like a mother, not at events or in meetings, but in the stillness of hope. One memory from that time would later return to her in flashes, a moment so subtle she almost forgot it. At one of her final appointments, a nurse had paused at the door with her chart in hand. She had glanced at Claire's belly, then hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward another nurse across the hall. The moment passed, but Claire remembered the look. Discomfort, uncertainty. At the time, she chalked it up to fatigue or miscommunication. Now, years later, it gnawed at her like a loose thread she never pulled. That nurse's name was never on the final records. Despite everything, the delivery date approached with a mixture of nerves and anticipation. Claire packed her hospital bag meticulously. She added framed photos for the room, soft. Blankets, a playlist of lullabies. Gregory said he'd meet her there. He was in Houston on business. He didn't make it in time. Julia drove her to the hospital, held her hand as she was wheeled into pre-op. It was a scheduled C-section, everything planned to the minute. Claire remembered the lights. Above her, the hum of machines, the white noise that slowly turned into silence, then nothing. When she woke hours later, she was alone. No babies, no cries, no nurses, just Julia at her bedside, pale and shaken. Claire tried to speak, but her throat was dry. Julia said, "They said the babies didn't make it." That sentence had echoed in her skull for years. Claire never saw a death certificate, never held a body. A doctor arrived minutes later, clinical and dismissive. "There were complications, we're very sorry." That was it. No details, no explanations. Claire had screamed at them, demanded to see her children. They told her it was too late. Back home, everything felt broken. Gregory showed up a day later with flowers. He kissed her forehead and said, "Let's try again when you're ready." That was the moment Claire realized he wasn't grieving. He was relieved. She never looked at him the same way again. The nursery door remained closed. The clothes stayed folded. Friends sent sympathy cards and then silence. The world moved on, But Claire remained in that hospital bed, stuck in a moment that refused to fade. Julia urged her to talk to someone. Claire refused. "They were mine," she whispered, "and they're gone." In the years that followed, Claire rebuilt her life brick by brick. She donated more, smiled more, appeared in magazines with quotes about resilience. But inside, she was hollow. Her nights were spent staring at the ceiling, hands over her stomach, remembering what never came. There were days she forgot to eat, nights she drank too much wine. Through it all, Julia stayed, loyal, quiet, always near. Sometimes Claire wondered if she was the only person who truly saw her, and maybe that's why, when she saw the triplets at the showroom, it didn't feel like a breakdown. It felt like proof, because even in her perfectly composed life, there had always been something off. A feeling in her bones. A mother knows. A mother feels. That day in the hospital wasn't just tragic, it was suspicious. Claire had buried that suspicion under wealth, under charity, under denial. But now the feeling was rising again, louder than ever, and this time she wasn't going to ignore it. The storm was coming, but the calm before it, Claire's curated life of illusion, was finally cracking. The memory came back like a whisper, faint, almost dismissible, but it clung to Claire's thoughts like dust that refuses to be wiped away. It had been buried for 6 years, forgotten under the noise of grief and the machinery of moving forward. But now, with everything reopened, with the faces of those boys burned into her mind, the detail returned. It was a moment in the hospital, just after the surgery, before the official news was delivered. Claire hadn't been fully awake, not entirely lucid, but something had stirred her. A voice, a phrase, and most of all, a tone. She remembered being groggy, her head swimming in anesthesia, unable to move but barely conscious. 2 women were speaking near the door. One of them said, "She can't see them, it's not going to work." That sentence had made no sense at the time, and she drifted back into unconsciousness before she could register it. When she awoke again, everything was already decided. The babies were gone. But now, with her mind recalibrated and her instincts screaming, that sentence returned like a haunting echo. She hadn't imagined it. She was sure of it. And now she had to know who said it. Claire sat at her kitchen counter, flipping through a copy of her discharge papers. They were sparse, sterile, standard language, nothing emotional, nothing revealing. But the name of the nurse on duty that night, Teresa Lundgren, stood out. She didn't remember the face, but she remembered the energy. Cold, rushed. Claire picked up her phone and called Julia. "Do you remember that nurse, Lundgren?" There was a pause. "Sort of," Julia said. "She was the one who pushed me out of the room when you went under, said something about hospital protocol. But yeah, she was weird, too polished." Claire closed the file and leaned back. "I need to find her." Julia hesitated. "Claire, you can't just start accusing nurses from years ago. What if you're wrong?" Claire's voice didn't shake. "Then I'll find out I'm wrong, but I need to know." That was the pattern now. Need, not want. Claire had spent years living in the shadows of someone else's truth. That era was over. "Start with the state board," she said. "See if she's still registered. See where she works. Anything." Julia was already typing. Claire stood up and walked to the fireplace. Staring again at the sonogram photos, she whispered the name, Lundgren. That same day, Julia called back. "Got something." She moved to Florida 2 years ago, working at a private hospital in Tampa. Claire didn't hesitate. "We're going there." Julia sighed. "You don't even know if she'll talk to you." Claire replied, "She doesn't have to talk. She just has to react." The next morning, they were on a flight. Claire barely slept. Her mind kept circling that one line. She can't see them. What did they mean? Who was they? And most of all, why? At the hospital's lobby in Tampa, they posed as potential clients seeking maternity services. Julia had booked a tour. When they arrived, Claire spotted Teresa immediately. She hadn't aged much. Same red hair, same stiff posture. Claire felt her stomach tighten. Teresa walked past them during the tour, and their eyes met. For a second, Claire saw something flicker in the woman's expression. Recognition, fear, maybe both. Teresa stopped mid-step, then continued walking. Julia whispered, "Did you see that?" Claire nodded. She remembers. Back in the car, Claire was shaking. "She knows something. I saw it." Julia tried to calm her. "Claire, you can't confront her here. She'll shut down. Or worse, report us." Claire was breathing hard, trying to slow down. "Then we find another way." But the feeling wouldn't go away. For the first time in years, she was near someone who had been there, really there when her babies were taken from her. And that woman had flinched at the sight of her. That wasn't nothing, wasn't. That was something. In the following days, Claire hired a private investigator. She didn't tell Gregory. She didn't tell anyone. The investigator reported that Teresa Lundgren had left the Atlanta hospital under unusual circumstances. Her transfer papers had been expedited. Her employment record had gaps. And most importantly, a former colleague described her as tight-lipped, overly compliant, and always close to Dr. Henley. That name struck Claire like lightning. Dr. Henley had been the one who delivered the devastating news after the birth. He was the man who said, "Complications." He was the one who offered nothing. Now there were two names, two people who had vanished from Atlanta's system within a year of her delivery. Claire stood in front of the bathroom mirror that night, staring at herself. Her hands gripped the marble counter until her knuckles whitened. She whispered, "Again, they can't see them." The sentence meant something, and she was going to find out what. The pieces weren't fitting perfectly, not yet. But she could feel the corners of the puzzle locking in. Every new name, every flinch, every lost document. They weren't accidents, they were moves. Claire wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. She was chasing the people who buried them, and this time she wouldn't stop at the first strange detail. This time she would follow it to the end. The morning after their return from Tampa, Claire sat in her home office, surrounded by old documents, manila folders, and an open laptop blinking with archived emails. For years, she had accepted what she was told. The babies didn't make it. Complications. End of story. But now, with Teresa, Lundgren's face fresh in her mind, and her reaction impossible to forget, Claire couldn't rest. She was chasing something real. But every time she reached for a concrete answer, the trail seemed to vanish into administrative fog. Bureaucracy had become the perfect smokescreen. Her first step was to request a full medical record from the Atlanta hospital where she gave birth. She submitted a formal request under her maiden name and waited. Days passed. When she called to follow up, a clerk told her the records were sealed. Standard practice, they claimed, for sensitive neonatal losses. Claire argued, demanded, even invoked her attorney. Still, they insisted the file couldn't be released without a court order. She hung up, her hands shaking with rage. "They're hiding something," she muttered. "There's no way this is protocol." Julia did her best to stay calm, to keep Claire grounded. "Let me talk to someone I know in legal," she offered. But even her contacts hit the same wall. Sealed, inaccessible, classified as sensitive. Claire had never hated those words before, but now they sounded like iron bars locking away her children. She remembered how, after the birth, she had asked for a funeral, for any physical proof. They'd told her it was all handled by the hospital. No urn, no photos, no death certificates mailed. Just pain and silence. That silence now was deafening. Claire attempted to contact Dr. Henley directly. She tracked down a private clinic in Virginia where he now practiced. She called under a fake name and booked a consultation, planning to confront him face to face. But when she arrived at the clinic, she was told he had unexpectedly taken a leave of absence. No explanation, no return date. Claire left furious, pacing the sidewalk. Outside the building, Julia, who had driven her, tried to offer comfort. "It's not a dead end," she said. But to Claire, it felt like a door slamming shut. Again, her frustration began to spill into other areas of her life. At a charity event that week, she snapped at a reporter for asking about future family plans. Gregory, ever the politician, gave a vague smile and steered the conversation toward business. Later, in private, he confronted her. "Claire, what the hell's going on with you?" She stared at him, her pulse racing. "You never wanted them," she said, voice trembling. "You were glad when they were gone." Gregory's face froze, and for a moment Claire thought she saw something dark flicker in his expression. But he said nothing, just turned and left the room. That moment haunted her. For years, she had told herself Gregory was just emotionally distant, a businessman, a man, raised to be cold. But now she started to wonder if it was more than that. Had he known? Had he helped them disappear? The thought was poisonous, yet impossible to ignore. Claire began rereading his emails from that time. There were gaps, periods when he was traveling with no flight receipts. She tried to access his business calendar from 6 years ago, but it had been wiped clean. "Too convenient," she said aloud, alone in her office. Even her attempts to contact the Horizons Foster Outreach Center where the boys had appeared were blocked. The director, a middle-aged woman named Darlene Bishop, replied to her request via email with a polite but firm message. "We cannot disclose identifying information about minors in our care." Claire replied instantly, asking to meet in person. No response. She called the office and was told Darlene was away on retreat. Every door she knocked on was either locked or vanished into fog. But Claire wasn't just frustrated, she was furious. In desperation, Claire spoke to a retired pediatric nurse named Carol, who had worked at the hospital during that time. They met at a small cafe outside the city. Carol was hesitant, nervously sipping tea, constantly glancing at the door. "I remember you," she said. "You had triplets. Everyone knew it was special." Claire's heart pounded. "Then why did they say I lost them?" Carol looked down. "I don't know everything, but there were whispers. Some babies didn't stay on record. They were placed differently. That's all I can say." Claire leaned forward. "Why?" Carol shook her head. "Because someone wanted them gone." That night, Claire sat in the nursery that had remained untouched for 6 years. The pale green walls, the mobile still hanging above the crib, the rocking chair that had never been used. She didn't cry. She just sat there, breathing, listening. The silence that had once felt like death now felt like conspiracy, a carefully constructed lie wrapped in pity and protocol. And she was done asking politely. Claire got up, walked to her desk and opened a blank notebook. On the first page, she wrote, "No more silence. I will burn this down if I have to." The world around her was still smiling, still oblivious, but Claire had stepped outside that world. She had crossed the threshold into truth, no matter how brutal it would be. And the more doors slammed in her face, the more she knew she was getting closer. The breakthrough didn't come through a lawyer or a doctor or a database. It came through social media. Claire had been up all night again, her laptop overheating on her thighs as she scrolled through local charity hashtags, school pages, and any post tagged with Horizons Outreach. It was a long shot, but she was too wired to sleep. Around 3:17 a.m., she clicked on a blurry photo posted by a young volunteer. The caption read, "Such an inspiring day with these amazing kiddos at the Youth Drive event. Horizons Atlanta, do future leaders." There they were, the same boys from the car show. Claire, enlarged the photo and stared. It was them. Same faces, same hair, same curious expressions. But this time, they weren't posing for a luxury magazine. They were seated on the hood of a community police vehicle, wearing matching t-shirts and sneakers. They looked relaxed, comfortable, but what grabbed her attention wasn't the boys. It was the banner behind them. It read, "Horizons Outreach, serving Georgia's foster youth since 2017. Claire's eyes narrowed. 2017. That was the year her babies were born. She stared at that date as if it were the missing piece to a riddle she'd been trying to solve. Blindfolded. It couldn't be a coincidence. She opened another tab and searched the charity's registration documents. Public records showed that Horizons Outreach was established on July 12, 2017, 3 days after Claire gave birth. A chill crept up her arms. She opened her hospital paperwork again. Her surgery had been on July 9th. The math was too clean, too exact. She closed the laptop slowly and sat still, letting the weight of it all crash down on her. The next morning, Claire and Julia drove across town to the listed address of the charity's main office. It was a modest brick building near a church and a rundown gas station. A simple sign in the window read, "Horizons Outreach, building brighter futures." Inside, the walls were decorated with children's drawings and staff portraits. A receptionist greeted them with a forced smile. Claire introduced herself under a false name and asked to learn more about their work. She didn't mention the boys. Not yet. They were given brochures, told about mentorship programs, scholarships, weekly outings. The receptionist mentioned that the center housed a small number of boys in transitional foster care, age 5 to 8. Most of them come from tough situations, she added. We don't always know their full histories. Claire asked casually, "Do you happen to have any siblings placed together?" The receptionist nodded. "Yeah, actually. We've had a few sets of brothers, triplets too, not long ago. They were pretty special." Claire's heart stopped. She tried to hide the tremble in her voice. "Are they still here?" The receptionist hesitated. "They're with a sponsor family now." That phrase, sponsor family, lingered. It sounded official, safe, but to Claire, it sounded like a euphemism. She asked to meet the program. Director Darlene Bishop. She was told Darlene wasn't in. Claire left her name, her real one, on the visitor log. Hours later, Julia got a call. It wasn't from the center. It was from an unlisted number. When Julia picked up, a woman's voice said, "Tell Claire Whitmore to stop digging. She's not going. To like what she finds." Then the line went dead. Claire listened to the recording over and over. It was brief, but the message was unmistakable. She wasn't just chasing shadows anymore. Someone out there knew what she was doing. Someone wanted her to stop. But instead of deterring her, it electrified her. "They're scared," she said to Julia, "and if they're scared, that means I'm close." That night, she couldn't sleep again. She opened the photos from the charity post one more time and noticed something new. An adult standing slightly in the background, blurred but familiar. She zoomed in. Gregory. She zoomed again. It was blurry, but the man's profile, the way he held his hands, the tailored suit, it matched. Claire felt the breath leave her body. Her husband had been there, at an event for a foster care center, with the triplets. And he had never told her. "He knew," she whispered. "He's known all along." She printed the photo, pinned it on her corkboard, and drew a red circle around the man's face. She didn't know how deep this went, but now it was personal. Gregory wasn't just emotionally absent, he was part of it. In the following days, Claire confronted staff. Members under aliases posed as a donor and asked to volunteer. Each time, she caught pieces of the puzzle. One woman admitted that some of the children had unusual intake stories. Another mentioned off-site files. No one spoke openly, but Claire collected the fragments like a detective. building a case. She even managed to track down one of the foster mothers who briefly hosted the triplets. The woman, nervous and tired-looking, said the boys arrived with no birth records. They just showed up with a caseworker and a folder. That's it. Claire asked if she remembered the boys' names. The woman hesitated. They were changed, but one of them, I think his original name started with Eli or something like that. Claire's heart skipped. That was one of the names she had chosen before they were born. Not many people knew that, not even Gregory. She wrote it down, circled it. Twice. Now she had something real. A name, a timeline, a photo. And above all, a feeling that the web was tightening. The pieces weren't yet complete, but the frame was visible. Someone had hidden her children, covered the tracks, changed their names, erased their history. And Claire had begun to unearth it all, bit by bit, memory by memory, proof by proof. There would be no going back now. The next step would mean confrontation. But she wasn't afraid. She was ready to face the people who stole her children, starting with the man sleeping in the bedroom down the hall. Claire never imagined that uncovering her children's whereabouts would only be the surface. She thought the conspiracy, if it existed, would begin and end with a cold hospital and maybe a cruel doctor or two. But the deeper she dug, the more threads she found, each connected to others. One night, sitting in her study, surrounded by printouts and post-its, she spread it all across the floor. Names, dates, locations. She traced red string between events, just like she'd seen in crime dramas. It was messy, but one pattern was emerging. These children, her boys, were not the only ones. She started by contacting anonymous support groups, parents who had lost infants under suspicious conditions. Julia found a forum for unexplained neonatal loss, mostly populated by grieving mothers with nowhere else to turn. Claire didn't post her real story. Instead, she wrote a vague question. Did anyone ever feel like their stillbirth wasn't real? The inbox flooded with responses. Most were emotional, confused, grasping, but a few were chillingly similar. The hospital said the baby was gone, but wouldn't let me see the body. No funeral, no photos, just a signature. Claire began reaching out privately. One woman, Sandra Kay, agreed to meet in person. They sat in a booth at a small diner in Macon. Sandra was in her early 40s, dressed plainly, visibly nervous. It was 2015, she said. Piedmont Medical Center. I was 29 weeks. Baby was premature. They said she didn't make it. Claire asked if she saw the baby. Sandra shook her head. They said she was too fragile, that it would be traumatic. But I heard her cry, right before they wheeled me out. Claire's throat tightened. Sandra continued, my husband didn't want to fight it. Said we needed to move on, but I always knew something was wrong. Claire asked for names, doctors, nurses. One matched her list, another named Dr. Henley. Again. Claire's hand shook as she circled it on her pad. Sandra added, I talked to a lawyer once. He looked into it and said the hospital had internal protections against legal inquiries. Like a wall. Claire didn't say it out loud, but she knew what it meant. This wasn't a one-off. This was a pattern. And it had gone unnoticed because the victims were grieving, isolated, and in most cases, manipulated into silence. Back in Atlanta, Claire reached out to a woman who had worked as an intake clerk for the foster system in 2017. Her name was Maribel. She agreed to meet after her shift, speaking in hushed tones. There were a few kids who came in with no proper paperwork, no history, just first names and fake birthdays. Claire asked if this happened often. Maribel replied, not a lot. But every time it did, the order came from high up, like director level. It wasn't our call. Claire asked who approved those orders. Maribel looked away. I don't want to lose my job, she said. But the answer was clear. Someone powerful was authorizing these disappearances. The name that kept resurfacing was Everett Granger. a high-ranking administrator in the Georgia Child Welfare Department. Julia found that he had previously worked in private healthcare administration, specifically at the hospital where Claire gave birth. That connection made Claire's stomach turn. A man, responsible for handling child placements, had once been positioned at a hospital with a history of missing newborns. Claire printed his photo, a polished man in a sharp suit. She stared at it. "You're part of this," she said under her breath. Claire arranged a fake meeting. Using a business alias, she requested a consultation about starting a non-profit to support displaced children. Granger agreed. They met at a midtown conference space. Claire wore a wig and introduced herself as Victoria Leeds. Granger was polite, confident, but when she mentioned Horizons Outreach and asked for advice about working with similar agencies, his tone changed. "Be careful who you associate with," he said. "Some organizations operate under unregulated circumstances." Claire probed. "Like what?" He smiled. "Let's just say, not all of them play by the same rules, but they all serve a purpose." His smile faded as he leaned forward. "Sometimes it's best not to know everything." Claire left the meeting with her heart pounding. That phrase, "they serve a purpose," echoed in her mind. What purpose? Who benefits from vanishing children? She began thinking in terms of supply and demand. Adoption, trafficking, even experimentation. The theories were horrifying, but one truth remained. Her children were taken, placed, disguised, and this man had helped make it happen. The scope of the conspiracy wasn't just emotional, it was institutional. Hospitals, foster systems, government officials, all working together, or at least turning a blind eye. Julia tried to reason with her. "Claire, this is too big. If you push too hard, they'll come after you." But Claire was past fear. "They already are," she said, holding up the voicemail recording from that anonymous caller. "They warned me. Now I warn them. I'm not going anywhere." The corkboard in her study grew more crowded. More strings, more names, more links. The center of it all was her children. Around them, a network of deception, built and protected by people with titles, badges, and resources. One evening, she stood at her window, looking at the city lights. "This isn't about me anymore," she whispered. "It's about all of them. Every mother who was lied to, every child taken." Claire no longer felt alone. The grief she had carried privately for years was now public, justified. And she wasn't just a mother anymore. She was a threat, a liability to people who had gotten away with too much for too long, and she was only getting started. Claire had always known that Gregory wasn't emotionally present. He was a man of deals, press statements, and performance, but somewhere in her heart, despite the distance, despite the years of polite detachment, she had believed that he was not cruel. He was cold, yes, but not evil. That belief shattered the moment she opened the drawer in his home office and found the envelope. It wasn't even hidden, just buried under business proposals and old travel itineraries. A thick manila envelope labeled "Confidential Placement, July 2017. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it out and began reading. Inside were copies of documents she had never seen, foster placement authorizations, medical transfer forms, and most damning of all, a notarized letter requesting the infants be listed as unclaimed. Signed not by a doctor, but by Gregory Whitmore. The date matched the day after her surgery. Claire sank to her knees, the papers falling around her like ash. Her mind went blank. The truth didn't come like a lightning strike. It came like a slow, icy tide rising inside her, paralyzing her from the inside out. He hadn't just known. He had done it. He was the reason. That night she didn't sleep. She sat in the nursery with the envelope in her lap, the rocking chair creaking beneath her. She stared at the name over and over. Gregory Whitmore, her husband, the father of her children, the architect of their disappearance. The realization broke something in her that had already been cracked for too long. Her chest tightened, a silent scream rising from somewhere deep. And yet, she didn't cry. Not yet. She couldn't afford to. She needed clarity. She needed to confront him, but not with rage, with precision. The next morning, Claire waited at the breakfast table, coffee, untouched. Gregory came in wearing his usual suit, scrolling through emails. "Morning," he muttered. She looked up slowly. "You were at the Horizons event." He froze. The silence stretched. Then he looked at her, calculating. "What are you talking about?" She slid the photo across the table. "You're in the background, behind the boys." His eyes narrowed. "So, you said you didn't know anything about them, but you were there, and then I found this." She tossed the envelope onto the table. Gregory didn't even flinch. He picked it up, skimmed it, and placed it down. "You shouldn't have gone." "Through my things," Claire's voice cracked. "That's what you're worried about." He stood, walked to the window, and exhaled. "Claire, it was complicated." She rose slowly, fury rising. "No, it was a crime." He turned, his tone suddenly hard. "You don't understand what you were doing, what we were facing." She stepped closer. "Then explain it to me. Explain why you stole our children from me." Gregory's mask slipped. "Because they weren't ours, Claire." "Not really." Her blood turned cold. "What does that mean?" He hesitated, then continued, low and sharp. "I had the embryos tested after the second round of IVF. I never told you, but there was a mismatch. You had an affair, Claire. Don't deny it. The genetic markers weren't mine." Her knees almost buckled. "You tested them behind my back," he nodded, "and I decided to act. Quietly, discreetly. Before the press, before the board, before my name got dragged into scandal." Claire shook her head in disbelief. "So you lied to me, let me grieve my babies for 6 years because you were embarrassed." His voice remained cold. "I protected you. You didn't know what you were carrying. Mixed-race triplets with my last name, you think. You? The board at Whitmore Holdings would have just smiled and clapped." Claire slapped him hard. The sound cracked through the room. He didn't react. He just stared at her. "You didn't just lie," she said, her voice shaking. "You erased them. You destroyed their identities. You buried them for your reputation." Gregory stepped closer, unshaken. "They're alive, they're healthy, they got a second chance with families who won't throw them into the spotlight." Claire's jaw dropped. "You don't get to play God. You don't get to decide what they deserve." He leaned in, voice low. "And you don't get to blow this up, because if you do, you won't just ruin me, you'll ruin them." That was the moment Claire realized something deeper. He hadn't just orchestrated this. He had believed he was right to do it. She walked away, went straight to her lawyer's office. She filed for separation that day, but that wasn't enough. Claire knew now that more people had known. His lawyer, the hospital, possibly even members of the board. She remembered the way the staff avoided her eyes during recovery, the way her mother-in-law never spoke of the pregnancy again. The betrayal wasn't limited to Gregory. It was systemic, silent, approved, and she was going to drag it all into the light. That night, Claire made a video. Just her, a blank wall, and the truth. She didn't post it yet, but she needed it to exist. She looked straight into the camera. "My name is Claire Whitmore. In 2017, I gave birth to triplets. I was told they died. It was a lie. They were taken from me. My husband signed the papers. My doctors looked the other way. And I want you to know, I'm coming for every single one of you who helped make it happen." She saved the video and whispered, "I won't be silenced again." This time, she wasn't just a grieving mother. She was a witness, a warrior, and the truth was no longer a secret, it was a weapon. The call came at 6:14 a.m., just as Claire was getting dressed. Julia burst into the room, phone in hand, face pale. "They're moving the boys." Claire froze mid-button. "What?" "A contact at Horizons Outreach just tipped me off. Someone filed an emergency transfer order. They're taking the Triplets. Out of state, today." Claire didn't even ask who, she already knew. Gregory. It was retaliation, the separation papers, the threats. Now he was trying to make them disappear again, but not this time, not while she was still breathing. In less than 10 minutes, they were in Julia's car, speeding toward the foster center. Claire's mind raced through every possibility. Would they forge new identities, split the boys up? Were they going to sell them into another placement program? Her chest tightened with a panic she hadn't felt since the hospital bed 6 years ago. She had lost them once by being sedated, passive, helpless. This time she would fight with everything she had. Julia weaved through traffic as Claire made calls to every legal contact she could reach. "They're moving them illegally." She barked into voicemail after voicemail. "Stop them, please." When they arrived, the center's doors were locked. A printed sign read, "Closed for staff training." Claire pounded on the glass until her hands turned red. A man in a suit stepped out from the side, startled. "Ma'am, you need to leave." Claire stepped toward him, holding up a printed photo of the Triplets. "Where are they? I know you're moving them." The man didn't respond. Behind him, Claire saw movement, a black van pulling out of the rear garage, tinted windows, no plates. "There!" she shouted. "Julia, go!" They sprinted back to the car. Julia hit the gas so hard the tires screeched. The van turned left, heading toward the freeway. Claire's heart pounded as they chased it through downtown Atlanta, weaving between early morning traffic. "Get the plate," Claire said. Julia snapped a photo, but the plates were covered. "Of course they are," she muttered. Claire called the police, reporting a suspected illegal transport of minors. "We need an officer to intercept a black van westbound on the I-20 ramp. No visible plates. 3 minors on board." The dispatcher sounded skeptical. "Ma'am, do you have custody of these children?" Claire's voice cracked. "I should." As the van sped onto the highway, Julia stayed behind it, careful but determined. Claire opened her laptop, praying her investigator had sent that last piece. Moments later, it arrived. Court-filed DNA confirmation, a legal document proving she was the biological mother of the Triplets. Claire emailed it to the dispatcher with shaking fingers. "Check your inbox. This is real." Minutes later, flashing lights appeared behind them. A highway patrol car swerved into the left lane and hit its sirens. Claire held her breath. The van ahead accelerated, but a second cruiser came from the front, boxing it in. The van pulled over. Claire jumped out before the car even stopped fully. Officers shouted for her to stay back, but she ran toward the van. The driver stepped out. Someone Claire didn't recognize. A woman, early 40s, official badge clipped to her jacket. "I'm with State Foster Relocation. These children are under authorized transfer." Claire held up the document. "Not without my signature, they're not." An officer stepped between them. "Everyone calm down." Claire pointed at the van. "Open it, let me see them." There was a pause. Then, finally, one of the officers unlocked the rear doors. Inside, sitting quietly and confused, were the 3 boys. They looked tired, their backpacks beside them. One of them, Eli, she was certain, looked up and met Claire's eyes. His face changed. Recognition? Curiosity? She couldn't tell, but it was him. It was them. Claire stepped forward slowly, tears already spilling. "Hi," she whispered. "I'm Claire." The boys didn't speak. The woman who drove the van tried to intervene. "They don't know you." Claire looked at her, fury rising. "That's because you made sure they never did." The officers reviewed the documents. One by one, they confirmed Claire's claim. Legal red flags, fraudulent transfer paperwork, a direct conflict with ongoing custody investigation. The officer in charge turned to Claire. "You need to come with us. We're going to figure this out at the precinct." Claire nodded. "As long as they come too." The woman from the van protested, but the officer shut her down. "You're under investigation. Step aside." Claire watched her stiffen, jaw clenched. Another face added to her wall. At the station, the boys sat in a quiet room with juice boxes and cartoons playing low on the TV. Claire sat just outside the door, afraid to go in. Julia finally nudged her. "Go!" Claire stepped in slowly, heart pounding. The boys turned. Eli tilted his head. "You were at the car show," he said softly. Claire smiled. "Yes, I saw you there, and I couldn't stop thinking about you." The other two leaned in. "Are you our mom?" Claire's breath caught. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I am." That moment didn't erase the pain. It didn't fix the years lost or the trauma inflicted. But it was a beginning, a fragile, trembling beginning. The boys didn't run into her arms. They didn't cry. They just looked at her like they were studying a picture they'd seen once but never understood. And that was okay. They were real. They were alive. And they were here. Outside, the sun was rising. Claire stood at the edge of a storm that had finally broken. The danger wasn't over. There would be hearings, threats, consequences, but none of that mattered, because this time she had them, and she was never letting go again. Claire woke before the boys that Sunday morning. The sun filtered softly through the curtains of the small, three-bedroom home she now rented just outside of Marietta. The silence was unlike any she had known in the past. It wasn't the silence of cold gallery walls or hollow mansions. It was the quiet that comes before laughter, the hush of safety, of peace. She sat at the edge of the bed for a moment, grounding herself. For years, her mornings had started with dread or detachment. Now, for the first time, she didn't fear the silence. She welcomed it. She took a breath. Then, just outside her, "Deux fois," came the soft shuffle of feet. Eli stood there, one sneaker untied, hair messy, sleep still on his face. "Can we have pancakes?" Claire smiled. "Of course." In the kitchen, while mixing batter and listening to Noah and Micah argue over cartoons, Claire saw just how much her life had transformed. If someone had told her a year ago that she would be here, apron on, cooking in a modest house with 3 children she was once told were dead, she would have called it delusion. But now, looking at her sons wrapped in blankets, half watching TV, half tickling each other, she knew there was no title, no board seat, no high society event that could compare to this. They had filled a space in her that no amount of charity work or expensive furniture ever could. The word mom had never sounded so powerful, so grounding. There were still challenges. Legal proceedings continued. Gregory's lawyers filed motions, appeals, delays, doing everything they could to muddy the waters. But Claire no longer felt like a woman defending her pain. She was now a fortress. Her resolve didn't come from anger, it came from truth. And truth, once unearthed, doesn't go quietly. The boys didn't understand everything, but they understood that something big had shifted. Sometimes they asked if they'd get to stay forever. Claire never answered with promises. She answered with action, being there. Every morning, every night, every time they needed reassurance, she was there. Julia had become part of this new family. She was there more days than not, helping with homework, picking up groceries, organizing school paperwork. The boys adored her. "Is she like our aunt?" Micah once asked. Claire smiled and said, "Something like that." Late at night, once the boys were asleep, Claire and Julia would sit on the porch with cheap wine and talk like survivors of a war they never asked for. "Remember when you ran after that van without thinking?" Julia said one night, laughing. Claire laughed too. "I remember my heel broke," she replied. And they both laughed, not because it was funny, but because they were still here, still standing. The boys carried their own trauma. Eli was quiet and observant. Micah talked non-stop, afraid of what silence might bring. Noah occasionally woke up crying from dreams he couldn't explain. Claire was learning their signals. They started therapy, slowly unpacking years of instability. One day, during a session, Eli told the therapist, "She smells like the same blanket we had when we were babies." Claire heard it from behind the one-way mirror and broke down. That wasn't just a memory. That was proof. Proof that despite everything, something deep inside them had remembered her. The media tried to turn Claire into something she wasn't. First, a tragic figure, then a hero. She rejected both. She didn't want a pedestal. She wanted healing, but she used her voice. She gave interviews, not to gain sympathy, but to help others like her. If you feel like something was stolen from you, don't stay quiet. Silence is their weapon. Truth is yours. That line went viral. She received letters from mothers across the country. Some had questions. Others just said thank you. She realized that this wasn't just about her boys anymore. It was about all the children like them. In her home office, Claire kept a bulletin board filled with old photos, names, court documents, timelines. In the center, in her own handwriting, were the words, "Never again." It wasn't about vengeance, it was about memory, about honoring the pain she lived, and the lives nearly erased. She didn't want to burn it all down. She wanted to make sure no one else had to rebuild from ashes. Her mission was simple now: protect what she had and make noise for those who couldn't speak. One day, a letter arrived from Gregory, handwritten, brief, cold. "I hope you're satisfied with the circus you created. You ruined everything." Claire didn't respond. She folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and locked it. He no longer had power over her. The man who once controlled the narrative now couldn't even control her attention. That silence, his silence, was the only apology he would ever offer, and it was enough. Months later, the final court ruling came through. Claire was declared sole guardian. The triplets' adoption was formally annulled. Their names were restored. They were, in every legal and emotional sense, hers. That night, they celebrated with pizza. On the living room floor, no tuxedos, no speeches, just a stack of pillows, cartoons, and 3 boys climbing over their mother, laughing without fear. At bedtime, Claire tucked them in, kissed each one, and whispered, "You're home." Eli, half asleep, murmured back, "I knew you'd find us." The next morning, Claire sat alone on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the sky warm into daylight. There were no headlines, no lawyers, no questions, just peace. She looked up, exhaled slowly, and whispered to herself, "They took everything from me, but I took it back, one breath, one step, one truth at one a time." Hi, I'm Erlen, and I'm the host here at Whispered Helms. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe, hit that like button, and leave a comment telling me what you felt. And most of all, share this video with someone who needs to hear this story too. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.